But let's reflect on Real Madrid's performance there. They got the job done, didn't they? This wasn't vintage Real Madrid, certainly wasn't their best performance of the season so far. And going down the years, we won't be remembering this one, but they did get the victory ultimately.
And I do think that Real are starting to look like a team that are overwhelming their opponents a little bit. And I think in the first half we saw Real with a ton of possession. As you mentioned, it wasn't brilliant because they weren't getting the goals, but at the very least, I don't feel like Mallorca really had much of a sniff in this game. And I think at the very least in La Liga, they're looking like the dominant team. Adam, I've been playing a lot of EAFC lately, on little online mode, little seasons mode. Everyone plays as Real Madrid. Why? Because they have these incredibly dominant figures in that forward line where you're going, oh my God, what am I going to do with this team today? And I don't feel like we've really felt like that very much in watching this team play in the biggest games, in the Champions League, in El Clasico, even against Atletico. That was a real back and forth game. But I think now against, you can call them the bottom half of the league, maybe in Spain, I really do think they are starting to exert dominance and win games because they are Real Madrid and they're overwhelming teams, I think, with their possession and just the sheer amount of talent that is on the field. So I think Real are starting to gain that identity a little bit. Gave it one or two chances here or there, but I was impressed in the overall with the manner in which they controlled this game.
Didn't score today, but for me, certainly when I've watched Kylian Mbappe in the last few games, it does seem to be that he's enjoying his football a little bit more, perhaps figuring out how best to play in this Real Madrid setup.
Well, I think that was the biggest issue coming into this season, was how was he going to settle? How was he going to figure things out in this team? Because there is a little bit of duplicate roles with him and Vinicius Jr. to his left, Bellingham through the middle, and obviously Rodrigo on the right as well. So it was going to be a chemistry equation, really, for this team. And I think for Real Madrid, that was Ancelotti's job for me from day one. Obviously, health was going to play some part of the role in determining if they could actually figure it out over the longer term. But I think you want to see as many games with the four of them on the pitch together as possible to see if you can figure out the balance of the team before you're playing your big games in the Champions League. Let's be real. Real Madrid defined their season based off what they do in March, April, and May in the Champions League. You want to be peaking at that time, and it does seem like Mbappe is starting to look like a Real Madrid player, look like he's a fit in this team, he's a fit with his teammates, and I think that can only be worrisome for, obviously, Barcelona in Spain, but for any of their Champions League competitors as well. I do think they're starting to figure it out.
For Mallorca, they didn't win the game, but they did give a fairly good account of themselves. They had a couple of opportunities in the first half, and they were probably just happy to be in Saudi Arabia competing in this competition.
Well, I think if you look at their last year, they are a team that, let's be honest, every year in Spain would be more than fine finishing 17th in division. As long as they don't get relegated, they had a decent season. But you can argue that this might be one of the best periods that they've had in club history by having a regular run of seasons in La Liga, getting to a Copa del Rey final. So in the semifinal edition of Supercopa, it used to just be the winner of the Cup against the winner of the league. Now, Italy and Spain have expanded it up to 4 teams, and so it's the winner and runner-up of the Cup and the league. So Mallorca got to a Copa del Rey final, and they're now here playing Real Madrid in one of these big showpiece occasions. That's as good as it gets for Mallorca. And to be in it with a chance all the way to the end of the game, we saw the last 2 goals don't come until second half stoppage time, to get all the way into the 90th minute with a chance to get something. Maybe you go to penalties and shock the world. I think that's the biggest thing for them. They came ever so close to winning a trophy. They've come ever so close to beating Real Madrid on this occasion. And for a club like Mallorca, that's the dream. And so I think that in some ways, the fact that it's come to an end does kind of put into stark reality that they're back into fighting for their lives week in, week out in Spain. But they're hoping to kick on and become an even bigger club from here.
Yeah, currently 6th in La Liga and punching above their weight, because it must be said they are a fairly small island.
Yes.
Off the coast of Spain. Speaking of punching above their weight, let's talk about Vini Jr. Because in the last few games, he's been kind of getting involved, not just scoring goals, creating goals as we associate him usually, but getting a bit frustrated in games. We saw him sent off in the league game against Valencia. He was kind of having a go again in this one against Mallorca. What do you put this down to? How do you think he's feeling?
I think he's had a pretty turbulent year. I think you go back, obviously, to the incidents where it all starts with him and the public seemingly in Spain having a very big battle. And I think that in some ways kind of has him, I don't want to say on the defensive, but I think with this mentality that it is a bit me against them. And obviously, he doesn't win the Ballon d'Or, so it's me against them again. And I just think he is in this position right now where he's kind of ready to snap back at any given moment. He was caught by the cameras after the game, basically taunting the Mallorca players, saying, not good enough, you're going home. And I just think that's a little unbecoming for a player like Vinicius Jr. and for a player at Real Madrid to be taunting the players from Mallorca. You are leagues above where they are meant to be as a club. And so for Vinicius, there's just that level of, he's gone through a very combative year. And I think in some ways that translates on the field. He's got that snap and that bite of still a player that is very competitive, that is still going after it at the highest level. And I wonder, given that he's kind of gone on this public campaign about trying to kind of ask the public to be better, obviously with the racism issue, I think is it's an obvious thing, and it shouldn't need to be a campaign, but he's embarked on that campaign. He's trying to model behavior. He's trying to preach to others to not be racist towards him or his teammates or whoever in the world. I do think there's a little bit of modeling behavior that you then have to do afterwards. When you become a role model, you then have to model your role. And I think there's a little bit of these incidents here and there. He's suspended for 2 games in La Liga. He had this issue after the game today where I think there's a little bit more responsibility based off of what he's done and what he said publicly to model behavior, in my opinion.
How do you think his teammates and Ancelotti feel about his behaviour? Do you think they at all potentially think that he is putting himself before the club and the team?
I think Ancelotti would have dealt with fiery characters down the years, and I think that is honestly, for me, Ancelotti's best role. He's figured out incredible game plans in games, but his biggest thing for me is he is a diplomat, and you have to be that at a club like Real Madrid. You're dealing with personalities above, below, all around you at that club, because there is just this incredible character about Real Madrid where there are fiery personalities in the boardroom, on the playing field. And so I think in dealing with Vinicius Jr., I think there is probably going to have to be a moment at sometimes. And you can definitely imagine Carlo pulling a player aside and going, hey, let's have a conversation about where you're at, about where we want to get to. And if you think that this approach, seemingly having fights and shoving opposing goalkeepers in the face and all these other things, is the right way to go, or it's just about, in some ways, what is the thing that Vinicius Jr. is kind of most known for? Baila Vini. Go dancing, express yourself, and play with joy and with verve, and show the world that you are the world's best player, as he feels like he rightfully is, and a lot of people feel like he rightfully is at this moment in time, the world's best player. And I think that is best expressed by him through the platform of joy than through the platform of anger. And I think that's the biggest thing for Ancelotti to figure out, is how to get him back to that state. Because I think a lot of things that happened in 2024 kind of bumped him from there. Poor performances with Brazil, them going out of Copa America, not winning the Ballon d'Or, everything that happened off the field. Really, the only thing is his success with Real, doing the league and Champions League double and continuing to win trophies. So I think that level of joy, I think, has to come back for him.
There's also a case to be made for, if these incidents keep repeating themselves, not only do opponents start thinking, oh, if we can rile him here, then we can get a reaction from him, but also when it's a few or one isolated incident, you don't affect your legacy. I mean, Zidane is probably the best example. We all remember what happened with him and Materazzi, but that, you know, almost people don't mention that. They remember Zidane as a legend and a hero, and they don't think about that one kind of flashpoint moment from his career. And the problem with Vini is if he keeps doing it again and again and again, then perhaps in 10, 20 years, we look back at him and think, oh, this was the guy who kind of kept losing it. So he's got to, for me, make sure that it doesn't become an extended period where he kept losing it.
Well, and to your point, Zidane did have that moment, and I honestly do think about that moment a fair bit. I think some people maybe of my vintage think of that moment from Zidane. I think if you ask any American that knows nothing about soccer, what do you remember about the World Cup? They'll think of, oh, wasn't that the time where that guy like headbutted that other guy? Not even knowing who, obviously, Zidane and Materazzi, some of the best figures of the game in this period. But you can have that one flashpoint where you go, oh, like that's the thing that where you get stained with for the rest of your career. And I would hope that Vinicius Jr. would take a step towards avoiding that. Maybe Zidane, being a Real Madrid figure and obviously a former Real Madrid manager, can have a role maybe to play in that. But I do think that you are that little step away from becoming that player that all of a sudden there's always something going on. There's always something dramatic. There's always a fight. And we saw that today after a game against Mallorca. We're talking about in a Clásico final, there is no love lost ever. And no matter where the game is being played, whether it's in Barcelona, in Madrid, or in Saudi Arabia, there is never any love lost in this rivalry. So I think keeping your cool and keeping your state of mind is very important going into this final on Sunday.
Because these were the scenes that we saw right at the end of the game. Carlo Ancelotti getting involved. I mean, pretty much everyone from both teams and the coaching camps getting involved in that kerfuffle at the end. And you have to say, you could make a case for the fact that everyone at Real is a little bit on edge at the moment.
Well, I think this has been a pretty stressful season, and they've gone through some periods where after they lost that Milan game, they're going into their next game against Atalanta, where if they lose that game, that they could potentially be out of the Champions League, which would be absolutely remarkable for a club like Real Madrid. This season has not gone, I think, the way that a lot of people would have dreamt, which is, wow, they just won La Liga and the Champions League. They signed Kylian Mbappe in the summer. Oh my God, the whole football world should be absolutely terrified. That level of terrifying has just not really been there. It hasn't been the kind of season that a lot of people would have expected. There was talk in the Madrid press, although, I mean, you lose any game and there's talk in the Madrid press about a manager change, but it would have been remarkable for Ancelotti, given what he's done in his career, that we're talking about his status in keeping his job at the club, and yet that was going on in Madrid, which is remarkable given everything that he has achieved. But I think that level of edge of how is it going to work with Mbappe and Vini and Bellingham, and these are very rich man's problems, but to them, they still seem like problems, and you're still in the bubble of playing for Real Madrid, where anything less than a 3 or 4-0 victory in style is seen as something of a under-delivering upon expectations. So I think there is just that constant feeling of we have to deliver more, we have to do better, and that pressure is always there, and I think it gets to the players, I think, at times.